It's only been about 2 months since Pokemon Scarlet and Violet speedrunners got their hands on the game. And even with such a short amount of time, we've managed to lower the speedrun from 7 hours all the way down to 5 hours. So how did times get this low, you might ask? Well, in today's video, I'm going to share with you all the entire history of the Pokemon Scarlet and Violet any percent speedrun route. It's no secret that Pokemon Scarlet and Violet have an incredibly long and detailed story to them. You'll typically start your journey off by picking a starter Pokemon and meet the main cast of characters. It takes quite a while to get through all their dialogue, but eventually you make your way to this giant academy where the opening ceremony mentions something called the treasure hunt. Essentially, this treasure hunt boils down to 3 main story paths that you can take throughout the game: the gym challenge path, the evil villain path, and the Titan Pokemon path that unlocks cool power-ups for your legendary bicycle you meet at the very beginning of the game. Once those 3 paths are completed, you're given a final path called the Way Home, where you'll team up with the main cast of characters and head straight into the last location of the game called Area 0, where your goal is to confront the professor in an attempt to get answers about the mystery of Paradox Pokemon and your legendary bicycle. Once you're past this final path, the credits will play, which defines the endpoint of the any percent speedrun. But with any percent defined as beating the game as fast as possible, how exactly do you go about doing that? Well, to answer that question, let's start by looking at the first ever proper speedruns of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. While there are a ton of first playthroughs performed with a timer, Pokemon speedrunner Dahlia was the first person to have what I would define as a definitive route. His speedrun began on Pokemon Violet by picking Quaxley and rushing to the school as fast as possible. But before he could get to the school, he won a rival fight versus Nemona at the beach, caught a Lechonk from the catching tutorial, fought Arven at the lighthouse, then for some reason took a def on the second Nemona fight right before entering the school. Unlike typical rival fights in past Pokemon games, this let Dahlia get past her even though he had lost. And good thing he did too, because this is where Nemona shows off the new terrestrialization feature, which wastes an entire minute on animation alone. So while Dahlia may not have won the battle, he definitely won the war on time save. Once he was inside the school, he rushed over to an item shop in order to purchase a Mystic Water, giving his Quaxley a nice 20% boost on every single one of his water moves. This easily got him past the force fight inside of the city, and eventually unlocked the ability to ride on his Miraidon. He then proceeded to the east side of Mesagoza, where Dahlia's goal was to exit the city and defeat the Rock Titan as fast as possible. From here, he proceeded to take his time to get just enough experience points to evolve his Quaxley, while picking up a few extra items and rare candies along the way. And within a couple of hits, the Rock Titan Cloth was no more, giving him a power-up on his legendary bicycle, which let him boost his speeds much faster than normal. With this new boost, Dahlia then started the process of what speedrunners have labeled Candy Party, Halloween, or my personal favorite, Around the World, where speedrunners invested time into collecting EXP candies and rare candies across the map. EXP candies give anywhere between 3,000 to 10,000 experience points depending on the size of the candy. And this amount of EXP usually gives a lot more levels than a rare candy will give on its own for lower level Pokemon. The reason why these candies were prioritized over typical trainer battles is because every single trainer that isn't involved in a gym or boss battle is an optional fight in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. So without any mandatory trainers to rely on, this became the best method for grinding out experience points to win fights. And luckily for us, Game Freak left a ton of those candies scattered everywhere. There were so many, in fact, that Dahlia could get level 50 on his starter Pokemon before fighting a single gym leader. I also want to emphasize that this was a day 1 strategy. Normally, strategies that folks come up with around release day will fade over time. But this candy obtaining process developed by Dahlia would be the skeletal structure that every single speedrun to this day still follows. So with a level 50 Quaquaval, it's no surprise to say that he wiped the floor with every single gym leader he could. And the only times he would stop is if a Titan power-up was required to get to the next gym. His gym and Titan priority ended up being the following. He started off with Claw for boost, Grass, Electric, then Normal Gym, Bombardier for swimming, Iron Treads for gliding, Water Gym, Ice Gym, and finally Psychic Gym, before Dahlia took a detour into a deep dark cave. This is where a powerful Pokemon was waiting for him. Sure, he already had a level 50 Pokemon in his party, but a guaranteed Lucario spawn starting at level 75 was too good to pass up for Dahlia, and I don't really blame him. This is a higher level Pokemon than even the final boss's entire team. But unfortunately for Dahlia, depending on how many badges you're at, you'll be forced into a level cap. This level cap causes disobedience, but only affects Pokemon that are caught at levels higher than the level cap. So even though Quaxley was above the level cap, it would listen to him because he obtained it at level 5. But a level 75 Lucario would not. So even though Dahlia had a doubles partner to take on the Ghost Gym with, he had to deal with disobedience issues, on top of the crowd wasting a ton of time by giving him a useless boost when Lucario didn't obey him and knock out the Pokemon in front of him. Dahlia did eventually brute force his way through the gym and was rewarded with the final badge, meaning Lucario would listen to him for the rest of the game. So with Lucario finally obeying, Quaxley overleveled, and a random Carcole in his box, he can now sweep his way through every single Team Star base, Team Star admin, the Titan Pokemon Dondozo, and finally the Pokemon League. The Elite Four and Champion were easily obliterated with moves like Close Combat, Ice Punch, Meteor Mash, and finally Bone Rush to deal with anything that had the sturdy ability. And by the time he had entered Area 0 for the final fight, his Lucario was level 84. But even with this insane level difference, he opted to play things safe by healing, setting up X items on his Lucario, and finally sweeping the final 2 bosses, ending his speedrun in 7 hours and 23 minutes. This was quite an accomplishment for its time, as this speedrun was set on the day the game was released. And after seeing these strategies in play, folks were quite convinced that this would remain the fastest route, especially once a ton of improvements were made. Etiquette, Headbob, and Truly28 would be the ones to pioneer and take this route to the next level. Just like you can take my channel to the next level by hitting that subscribe button for more Pokemon speedrunning content, like my video on the speedrunning history of Pokemon Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl. Etiquette would be the one to put his focus towards strategies similar to Dahlia, where he used both Quaxley and Lucario, but came up with a much more refined version of the route in comparison. While Headbob and Truly merged their brains together to form a Lucario route that instead used the Sprigatito line. It's easy to see why they lean towards Sprigatito as well when you compare its final evolution's base stats to Quaquavel's. Not only this, but Meowscarada also has a way more ridiculous move pool. But in the end, those advantages didn't matter, because while Meowscarada did eventually achieve a world record for a time, it just couldn't keep up with Quaquavel's newfound dominance. And this dominance was achieved by cutting out a ton of rare candies, the early items Dahlia's route might have bought, and using the around the world trip to mark almost every fly point before eventually fighting the gym leaders. This helped get times lower and lower until finally the world's first Pokemon Scarlet and Violet speedrun in under 6 hours was achieved by Etiquette. An absolutely astonishing achievement to break what is likely the final hour barrier until hopefully a performance patch in the near future. But while the Lucario route was thriving in the spotlight, another Pokemon that had been used in multiple other speedruns was waiting and ready to be used once again. And this Pokemon was Hawlucha. Hawlucha is known as the fastest Pokemon for both Pokemon XY and Ultra Sun and Moon speedruns. So when a trick called the backwards long jump, which gets you up cliffs without falling, was brought to my attention, I knew this had potential for time save. But more importantly, I knew I could reach a Hawlucha almost immediately after the game's intro. So I brought this news up to my friend and longtime Pokemon speedrunner Shenanigans, and we merged our efforts to develop a route to finally beat Lucario. The things I knew that really held back the Lucario route were the amount of evolutions, Pokédex entries, and really slow move animations. So in the words of Truly28,
yeah, so like eventually it's going to come down to the point where people are using like, you're using the fastest move possible and shit like that. Like, I don't know.
And boy was he right. Hawlucha would be the first one to prove this concept with moves like low kick and acrobatics that only took 3 to 4 seconds at most. But this wasn't the only thing that would help make up time over Lucario. New paths to travel over the map were developed that cut out minutes of time that the Lucario route couldn't make up in the same way. since taking on Titan Pokemon early wasn't as feasible for the starter Pokemon. But for Hawlucha, they could low kick everything from the start. And since each of the Titan Pokemon weighed a ton, it changed low kick's base power from 100 to 120 per kick, easily knocking them out within 1 to 2 hits. And with the new Titan powers, we could jump over cliffs, glide over difficult terrain, and even climb mountains that save time over the normal methods of traveling to gyms, all without having to constantly fly back and lose a bunch of time from having to fly to fly points later on. So unlike the typical Lucario order, things went more like this. We'll start off by picking Fuecoco instead of the other 2 starters. While Fuecoco's not that great at taking out gym leaders, he can still take out 2 low-level gym leaders later on. We'll then head straight to Hawlucha after the Giant School tutorial, where unfortunately, Hawlucha is caught at level 22. This means it's above the obedience cap at 0 badges. So we have to hope and pray for 2 turns of obedience when rushing the Rock Titan Cloth for the boost. Then take a detour into the Grass Gym, where after earning his badge, Hawlucha will finally obey us for the rest of the game. Afterwards, we can easily rush things like Earthworm to save time on travel, zoom through any gym fights in the area, grab a few Titan power-ups, then eventually head to the Bug Gym. This order of operations is very important because of one certain rival fight. We were stumped by this fight since dying to Nemona saves 1 minute every single time you lose. But the problem is, one of these fights was smacked right at the end of a gym fight, leaving you no choice but to keep the same lead Pokemon for the Nemona fight afterwards. But with absolute Giga Brain strategies like taking out the Bug Gym with Fuecoco instead of Hawlucha, you could then win the gym battle, still lead with Fuecoco, and lose the Nemona fight immediately after. From here, defeating and using the power of Dondozo to climb up the Psychic Gym mountain was a no-brainer for time save, followed by a couple more gyms, a few Team Star fights, and on to the storyline completion. Picking Fuecoco had one final benefit that would become clear as we approach one of Starfall Street's final fights, the battle versus Clavel. As it turns out, Clavel will always have a Gyarados on his team if one of the other 2 starters are chosen, but not when you pick Fuecoco, giving us a solid advantage as a physical attacking Pokemon who doesn't want to deal with the Intimidate ability. Hawlucha would also gain access to Fling, which when combined with a quick shopping trip to obtain King's Rock, could force a flinch onto any Elite Four Pokemon with Sturdy. So with the pure power of fast move animations, amazing routing, and a very fast bird, we eventually saved just enough time to finally beat the Lucario route. We improved our times a ton, slowly eliminating unnecessary setup, figuring out even faster move animations, and eventually giving up on Pokemon Violet entirely. Because for the longest time, we hardly looked at Scarlet's potential for speedrunning, as the games were quite similar and the popular game at the time was Pokemon Violet. But it seems as though Miraidon was hiding some weird unexplained lag in its boosters. It was strange, but overall quite beneficial for improving the route, since Scarlet had way easier endgame fights on top of less lag. And speaking of lag, we eventually figured out save plus reset strategies to mitigate lag inside of the Team Star bases and the long walks inside Area 0. This was all due to the unoptimized nature of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, with its memory leak problems that straight up lag the game if you leave it on for too long. With all this added up, this got Hawlucha times all the way down to sub 550. Before another monstrous Pokemon would show up to take the throne of fastest Pokemon. It was at this point that Hawlucha had completely eclipsed the Lucario route, and it was really hard for them to keep up. But one of the original inventors of the Hawlucha route invented something for a different category that greatly affected any percent. The single story speedrun for Path of Legends is a category where you defeat every Titan Pokemon as fast as possible, ending the category with a fight with Arven. Originally, this was done in a very different fashion with a much lower level and slower Flamigo that took about 2 minutes to get to. But as Shenanigans was watching my friend, the 4th gen gamer, he saw room for improvement on this route, with not only a faster Flamigo, but a higher level one in a very convenient area compared to the last one.
Level 17. Ooh, that's spicy.
And so came the era of Flamigo any percent speedruns, and Headbob would be the first one to do them. When you compare Flamigo and Hawlucha, their base stats look insanely similar. But the main difference is that Hawlucha has better speed, while Flamigo has better attack. Could this be what took Hawlucha down for good? This had potential, and Headbob was ready to show it off. With that extra attack stat, Flamigo could get away with much less setup, which also meant much less animation. The only problem was that Flamigo couldn't naturally learn Swords Dance like Hawlucha, so Headbob had to take a huge detour in order to grab it. They also did things in almost the exact same order as Hawlucha, but with much more success. Flamigo being obtained at level 17 meant that obedience on the Rock Titan cloth was no longer an issue. The other amazing benefits Flamigo got were access to Double Kick and the ability Scrappy. Not only does Scrappy get rid of the attack drop from the Intimidate ability, but also the animation that comes with it. This saves Flamigo a decent chunk of time and setup from having to deal with this ability all throughout the speedrun. Whereas Double Kick answers the issues that the ability Sturdy presents. Since anything with the Sturdy ability lives on 1 HP if you try to OHKO it, it becomes faster to use a multi-hit move to 2-hit KO it instead. So with the move Double Kick, the ability Scrappy, and a really busted attack stat, the world record dropped from a 548 to a 545, shaving off 3 entire minutes versus Hawlucha. This shocked everyone, and many people were just happy to see Hawlucha might no longer be the dominant force since it had been used so much in the past. But Hawlucha runners would not take this sitting lightly, because every time Flamigo found route improvements, it would also work for Hawlucha too. But eventually, every Hawlucha speedrunner gave up on the green bird, including me and Shenanigans. While Hawlucha still has a ton of potential to this day, it was hard to compete with the consistency Flamigo brought to the table. And soon enough, even Etiquette, who held on for dear life to the Ducario route, began venturing into Flamigo territory. So with the combined efforts of Headbob's original route, me, Etiquette, and Shenanigans developed the ultimate Flamigo route. When I was first developing ideas for the route after switching to Flamigo, I became inspired by yet another Path of Legends route change. This one was developed by longtime speedrunner Garfield the Lightning. This route took quite a detour after obtaining Cloth's power-up. Normally we'd head to Lavencia and grab a few rare candies along the way before fighting the Steel Titan. But instead of that long trip into the Electric Gym town, we instead do a backwards long jump right behind the Rock Titan cloth that marked the city's Zapapico as a fly point, then obliterated the Steel Titan afterwards. This massive change saved a ton of time in Path of Legends, and I had a sneaking suspicion that any percent would benefit from it too. And as it turns out, I was right, and immediately reached out to Shen, who evolved this route even further. Shenanigans theorized a speedrun route that would save minutes of time by delaying Earthworm until after we had our trip around the world. This would give us enough EXP candies to immediately level up high enough to take out Earthworm in one hit. The fight versus Earthworm is quite insufferable at lower levels with its slow animations like Sandstorm and Wrap, but at higher levels, this wasn't a problem at all. Just like when Etiquette theorized that it would be worth delaying the Grass Gym leader Brassius until we could double kick him later to avoid Sturdy. Since normally Brassius would use the move Trailblaze in an attempt to outspeed us and waste a solid 20 seconds. Improving once again on something Hawlucha could not keep up with. And the final addition to the route would be to grab an extra Acrobatics TM to put on our partner Pokemon for the Ghost Gym. Typically, these Pokemon would be either Scyther or a high-level Hawlucha found near the Fighting Crew base, both of which learn Acrobatics and can obliterate the Ghost Gym's partner Pokemon with ease. And as it stands with this giant route change, the current world record sits at an insane 5 hours and 23 minutes by Saiyan Sync, whose dominance in this game has been incredible. Just like the development of this game's speedrun route. One that not only took shifting between 6 different Pokemon to get there, but one that started off at a whopping 7 hours. And with a possible new performance patch along the way, and the potential for the glitch route to overtake any percent, who knows where speedrunners will take this game next.